Peace, love and life, family. It's your girl, Morgan Renee Myers, tuning in. Ooh, choking myself with this darn moo-moo. Tuning in for another reading of For Freedom's Sake, The Life of Fannie Lou Hamer by Chana Kai Lee. When we ended off, I was still in chapter 2. I was coming toward the end. I remember, I think it started getting hot. My phone was like 15%. I was outside, and I didn't get to quite finish. It was only a page and a half left, maybe. And then it was going to be time to go into chapter 3, which I'm going to continue over into chapter 3. I have the energy thus far. So let me get my bookmark in place, because I may not get through all of 3. You know, these chapters be long as the day is. Okay, so it's a lot to review. It was a lot going on. We're just gonna have to catch up. So we're talking about the life of a civil rights activist, Fannie Lou Hamer, and it was a lot that we learned about her involvement, how she got started, the harassment that she was facing from white folk for just trying to register to vote. Okay, so where did we end? I'm going to start at the bottom of page 42, and then we'll work our way around. So, although Hamer did a little work with SCLC, an adult-oriented group, she preferred working alongside the young people in SNCC because they inspired her the most. As she rose to become one of the organization's leading spokespersons, Hamer began traveling across the South, touching many audiences with her dynamic speaking style and her impassioned descriptions of the tragic plights of blacks in Mississippi. Her witty, anecdotal speeches, combined with her impromptu singing performances, made her an effective fundraiser for the movement in Mississippi. Hamer's main center of activity in the Delta was the SNCC field headquarters, Greenwood, Mississippi. There she acquired a reputation for being hardworking and deeply committed. Each and every day, one could pass by a church and hear her singing and preaching about the need to join the movement. She was also widely respected for her knowledge of the Bible and her outspokenness. She often challenged pastors in their own churches, calling on them to address the immediate obstacles hampering black life and to embrace the movement in whatever way possible. You are welcome, Laquita. My pleasure. I love sharing great books, reading black books by black authors about our black history and black lives, whether they be fiction, autobiography, biographies. So you're welcome. Definitely check it out. It's a wealth of knowledge in here just about her lifestyle and the times that we're in and how much has not really changed. So each and every day, one could pass by a church and hear her singing and preaching about the need to join the movement. She was also widely respected for her knowledge of the Bible and her outspokenness. She often challenged pastors in their own churches, calling on them to address the immediate obstacles hampering black life and to embrace the movement in whatever way possible. According to the former SNCC activist and Greenwood native June Johnson, see, laughter, you really ain't supposed to ask no preacher any questions in the middle of the sermon. But see, Mrs. Hamer would get up and disrupt the sermon and want to know certain things that he didn't talk about in terms of how it related to our daily survival. By 1964, Greenwood had become a hotbed of civil rights activity in the Delta, and Hamer's role in this was certainly not lost on SNCC. As recorded in the minutes of a staff meeting in October, James Jones pointed out in G. Wood, people are beginning to relate to each other, i.e. to Mrs. Hamer. Greenwood citizens were becoming more active, partly as a consequence of Hamer's presence and influence. Whenever SNCC members addressed Fannie Lou Hamer, they never dreamed of calling her anything other than Mrs. Hamer, an indication of their deep and abiding veneration. In turn, Hamer had the same admiration and respect for the foot soldiers, as they were called, because of the dangerous nature of their work. She was attracted to their sincerity and to the uncompromising stance that the organization took on a variety of issues. Hamer was skeptical of traditional black leadership, particularly that of the clergy. She believed that they were too quick to sell out. She often referred to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, as the National Association for the Advancement of Certain People. Clearly, Hamer and the young SNCC activists stood outside the circle of mainstream black leadership. From the vantage point of more established activists, Hamer and SNCC represented political outsiders, a category of other. For Hamer, it was her class that set her apart. For SNCC activists, it was their youth and radical brand of politics. Political style and substance notwithstanding, the mutual attraction between Hamer and SNCC radicals probably had something to do with their perceived status as others. SNCC was just where Hamer wanted to be. It was a grassroots organization that never forgot about the people for whom it was fighting. SNCC's purpose was not to lead the people, but to bring out and train the leadership already present in the community. Hamer was such a leader. However, her emergence did not occur until a compatible organizational structure presented itself. Hamer had been a nominal member of the NAACP, which had been on the scene but failed to do the two things that SNCC accomplished. One, organize and strengthen leadership already present, and two, articulate realizable and immediate goals. For example, voter registration. Although it had a long-time interest in black suffrage, the NAACP conducted its main battles in the courtroom. This strategy had little mass appeal and was relatively slow and very time-consuming. However, when SNCC hit the scene, it came with a plan of action that produced consequences that were noticeable and appreciated without much delay. Hence, the emergence of Hamer and other leaders of the movement was a matter of both historical circumstance and personal qualities. The nascent civil rights crusade developed a context ripe for unprecedented social progress. As the struggle unfolded, it set the stage for a display of distinctive character and will by individuals soon to be called leaders. And in turn, the emergence of such leadership fueled the movement and kept it alive, generating more and more local leadership. As Hamer's responsibility and authority increased, she continued to be a popular target for local law enforcement officials. In June 1963, Hamer was returning with 7 others from a voter registration workshop in Charleston, South Carolina, when they were arrested in Winona, Mississippi, 60 miles east of Indianola. Hamer and other members of the group were taken to jail, where they were beaten into bloody pulps and detained for 4 days. Hamer survived to tell this story, and she would tell it repeatedly for the rest of her life. Oh, Lord. Chapter 3. Let's get ready. Chapter 3 is called Winona. And it starts off with this. It says, our big job now is to clean up the state's image, splattered by the rights workers. We'll now have to teach the younger Negroes the democratic and Christian way of doing things. I'm assuming this is by a white man. It says this is from Mayor Charles Durow, Ruleville, Mississippi. Wow. In the spring of 1963, 32-year-old Anel Ponder, a coordinator in SCLC and assistant to Septima Clark on the Dorchester Citizenship Project in Georgia, came to Greenwood, Mississippi to teach people about voter registration. Ponder usually worked closely with SNCC in the Delta, and the organization was preparing Greenwood for her coming. Widely respected SNCC personalities known collectively as the Big Eight, Bob Moses, Sam Block, James Foreman, Willie Peacock, Charles McLaurin, Lawrence Guyot, James Jones, and Lafayette Cerny were already present and holding nightly mass meetings before she arrived. On Monday, June 3rd, 1963, a group of Mississippi citizens who had been training with Ponder left Greenwood on a Greyhound bus. Their destination was Charleston, South Carolina, where they planned to conduct teacher training classes for voter registration work. The civil rights activist Septima Clark had established a number of citizenship schools there that were very successful in teaching people how to pass literacy tests. The Mississippi group was going to learn how to handle this difficult part of the registration process. The group included John Brown, Bernard Washington, Yvester Simpson, June Johnson, Rosemary Freeman, James West, Anel Ponder, and Fannie Lou Hamer. Some members of the group decided that they would use the trip to test the Interstate Commerce Commission ban on segregated bus terminals. They started in Greenwood, where they met with no significant reaction from white authorities. The real trouble began for the group in Columbus, Mississippi, during the return journey. Ironically, they had abandoned any plans to integrate bus terminals by the time they reached Columbus. Nevertheless, here the group met with the consequences of earlier actions. When it was time to change buses in Columbus, and all the black people were in line preparing to board the bus, the white driver approached them and started pushing the members of the group, knocking them to the ground. He then told all of the white passengers in line to come get in front of the blacks. As the black passengers members were getting up from the ground, Hamer asked the bus driver his name while a few other members of the group took down his badge number. This was one of the lessons they had learned in their leadership training workshops, getting identification of one's assailant and all other necessary information for one's immediate and long-term protection. The bus driver then forced them to sit in the back of the bus. As he was doing so, Hamer said that she was going to report him to the appropriate authorities. Speaking directly to the bus driver, Ponder also added, "You're violating our civil rights." To this, the bus driver responded, "Niggers don't have no civil rights." After everyone was on board, with the civil rights workers in the back, the bus driver drove out of Columbus on Highway 82 and on to the next major layover, which was Winona, Mississippi. But before reaching Winona, the group noticed some very suspicious behavior on part of the bus driver, which became the cause of great concern. At each little town where the driver made a scheduled stop, he disembarked and made a telephone call. After a few more suspicious stops, the bus finally pulled into Winona at around 11:15 on Sunday morning, June 9th. Since this would be their longest rest stop, 5 members of the group decided to go inside the terminal to get a hamburger and to use the restroom. Hamer remained on the bus. Those who got off noticed a highway patrolman, a police chief, and a local sheriff watching the terminal as a crowd of white civilians started gathering and staring at the bus. The group ignored this ominous scene and walked into the terminal where they entered the cafe. Disregarding the custom of segregated seating, they sat down at the lunch counter and waited to be served. Accounts by June Johnson, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Anel Ponder imply that members of their group actually went in for food, but that they also had social justice on their minds once they sat down. That is, they truly wanted to eat, but were intent on getting non-discriminatory first-class service at the lunch counter. Two waitresses Two waitresses behind the counter attempted to ignore the members' presence until finally Ponder and a few other riders got one waitress's attention and requested that she wait on them. She replied, "We don't serve niggers." The other waitress balled up her dishcloth and flung it against the wall behind her, sighing and exclaiming, "I can't take it no more." Sometimes remaining true to one's individual responsibility to uphold segregation was a disconcerting challenge for the people Jim Crow was intended to protect and privilege. By this time, the police chief and the highway patrolman had entered the cafe from the rear. They walked up to the members of the group, took out their billy clubs, and poked them in the side, saying, "Nah, niggers eat on the other side. Y'all get out. Get out." Ponder attempted to reason with the law enforcement officials by carefully explaining current civil rights laws, but to no avail. One lawman simply replied, Ain't no damn law. You just get out of here." The travelers walked outside the diner where they continued talking among themselves for the next few minutes. Noticing all of the activity outside the terminal, Hamer left the bus and joined the others. Ponder told her that the police kicked them out of the cafe, to which Hamer said simply, "Well, Anel, that's Mississippi for you," and returned to the bus to rest. Ponder began considering a collective response. After continuing to talk with some of the other members about what they experienced inside, Ponder went back to the door of the cafe and peered inside to get a good look at the officers. When the officers noticed her looking in, she turned away and returned to the group. Ponder then suggested that they begin collecting information to make a report on the officers. She started taking down the license number of one of the patrol cars. While she was doing this, a fat white man dressed in overalls rushed back into the bus station and apparently told the 2 law enforcement officials. The authorities responded with great fury. The patrolman and the chief of police rushed out of the restaurant, one of them declaring, "Y'all are under arrest. You are under arrest. Get in that car there." The highway patrolman walked up to 16-year-old June Johnson, who was also copying down information, and said, "I'll teach you about messing with my car." Just as the police began rounding up members of the group to take them off to jail, Hamer jumped off the bus again. She asked the others in police custody if they wanted her, as well as the other 2 members of their delegation still aboard the bus, to go on back to Greenwood. Led by Ponder, all of the group members quickly replied yes. Before leaving South Carolina for Mississippi, The activists had agreed that whatever happened to one would happen to all, especially in the case of arrest. During the time that the bus driver had been making those suspicious stops in the small towns, the group members all affirmed their loyalty to one another. Urging Hamer to remain on the bus seemed to go against this agreement. Perhaps the arrested members thought it wise that the older Hamer and the two others return for help. The thought of blacks standing up for their rights increased the ire of the police with each passing moment, moving them to respond with cruelty. Before Hamer could get back on the bus, the highway patrolman hollered, "Get that black son of a bitch too. Bring her down the other car." As Hamer was bending over to get into the second patrol car, the Montgomery County Sheriff, Earl Wayne Patridge, kicked her. En route to the jailhouse, the police officer and the sheriff cursed Hamer and asked her questions. Each time she attempted to respond, the sheriff hollered, "Shut up." Two of the original members of the group were not taken off to jail, though the police were sure they had gotten all of them. The two who returned to Greenwood immediately informed others of what had happened to their 6 co-workers. When the activists arrived at the Montgomery County Jail, white folks appeared from everywhere with guns, according to June Johnson's account. None of the officers told any of them why they were being taken into custody, commenting only, "Y'all raising hell all over the place." At each step of the booking process, members were subjected to some degree of physical punishment. Young Yvester Simpson was punched, and James West, the only man in the group, was given a swift kick while an officer jumped on his feet. The interrogation began with a flurry of questions evidently aimed at determining motive and responsibility. Who is your leader? What are you doing here? Where are you coming from? The process closed with a threatening statement from one of the interrogators. "We're going to teach you a lesson." After the general interrogation, the activists were taken to separate cells. As it turned out, they were separated so they could be subjected to individual beatings. Among the first to be taken off by herself was June Johnson, who was placed in a cell where she received what turned out to be the beating of her life. Just before it began, an officer asked her if she was a member of the NAACP, to which Johnson replied yes. The teenager made an unsuccessful appeal to her tormentors as officers of the law by recounting the illegal behavior she witnessed at the cafe, such as the groups being refused service. In the cell with the others, Ponder overheard Johnson's futile efforts, to which one officer coldly replied, "What do you think we are supposed to do about that?" Johnson continued, "You all are supposed to protect us and take care of us." Her faith in the law was slowly waning, but she made one last futile appeal to whatever sense of fairness and duty the officers might have had. After this, all Johnson's co-workers could hear in the adjacent room were screams and sounds of blows for the next few minutes. A number of white men began striking her in the head and stomach, punctuating each delivery with statements like, "We're going to teach you how to say yes, sir, to a Mississippi white man." Johnson began crying and screaming for help. Finally, the men began concentrating most of their blows to her head. In the end, she was left with a sizable permanent knot and a left eye that was irreplaceably damaged. That made me cry. Hold on. Whew. Man. The evil stuff that white people have done just because black people want to have equality and live as decent human beings like they have a right to do. The lies they make up, the way they abuse us. This shit is heartbreaking and traumatic. They left a permanent knot on her head and a left eye that was irreparably damaged. The attackers then tore off most of her clothes. Personal humiliation was just as much their objective as was their physical injury and political intimidation. After the beating, the officers left Johnson alone for a time in her bloody and badly torn clothes. They returned and instructed her to get up from the bed immediately and strip in front of them. They insisted that she promptly wash her clothes, which according to Johnson was an attempt to get rid of the evidence of her beating. They also demanded that she wash all the blood off her body. The highway patrolman said that she was exactly that she had exactly 5 minutes to get the blood washed up. They then ordered a jailer to mop up Johnson's blood from the floor. Johnson washed her badly torn clothes, but she hid her bra, slip, and panties under the mattress so they would not ask for them. When Johnson's mother came to see her a day or so later, June slipped her the underclothes so that her mother could smuggle them out to keep for evidence. As June later put it, I still had a sense enough to keep some evidence. Upon finishing with the young teenager, the officers threw her into a cell with her co-worker, Rosemary Freeman. As Johnson walked across the large jail room, passing by the cells of other women, the rest of the registration workers started crying as they scanned her bloody face and tear-filled eyes. They were especially shocked by her badly damaged left eye, which appeared to be bulging from its socket. So much blood was gushing from it. Next, the Winona law enforcement officials turned to Anel Ponder. They had warned Ponder, a Georgia native, that she was in line for punishment because she was an out-of-state agitator, and they were likely going to also teach her how to say yes, sir, to Mississippi white folks. Ponder was taken away to the same cell where Johnson had been savaged, and for a moment was forced to stand in the blood-stained spots that were still visible from Johnson's beating. There are some contradictory accounts of Ponder's experience in the jail. Some versions say that she remained in solitary confinement throughout the group's stay in jail, while all the others shared cells. The officers began the same process with Ponder, asking her questions while simultaneously delivering blows. Can't you say yes, sir, nigger? Can't you say yes, sir, bitch? One of her attackers added, y'all just stirring up shit and making it stink. Y'all were doing a demonstration. Ponder responded that they were not planning a demonstration at the time, that they only wanted something to eat. As Ponder was trying to talk, the men kept insisting that she reply by saying, yes, sir. I want to hear you say, yes, sir, nigger, one of them demanded. This symbol of their power was of great concern to the officers. When Ponder and the others first entered the jailhouse, a white man approached her and insisted that she defer to him, which she would not do. He was desperate to know if Ponder had enough respect for him to say yes, sir, in response to his questions and demands. Ponder replied that she just did not know him well enough to do so. During her beating, this officer and his accomplices continued to hound her about this lack of respect. 3 officers and 2 civilians took turns haranguing her and beating her with blackjacks and a belt, fists, and open palms, including a blow delivered to her stomach by the highway patrolman standing nearby. The men repeatedly insisted that she say yes, sir, and as Ponder put it later, that is the one thing I wouldn't say. After 10 minutes of being beaten and humiliated, Ponder was placed in a cell by herself. When she fell asleep, she was awakened and made to eat by jail officials who addressed her as, you black African-looking son of a bitch. Throughout her stay, police officers kept insisting that she say yes, sir, or mister. At one point, Ponder asked why this was so important, but her question only resulted in more abuse. Later, after Ida Holland, a SNCC worker, managed to see Ponder on a visit to the jail, she reported back to the SNCC Greenwood Field headquarters. Anel's face was swollen. She could barely talk. She looked at me and was able to whisper one word: freedom. After Ponder, officials turned to Fannie Lou Hamer. When Hamer arrived at the jail, she had been placed in a cell with her co-worker, Yvester Simpson. Immediately, Hamer began to hear hollering and screaming, noise that will remain in her memory forever. And you know, that screaming and all of that will always follow me. I will never forget it, she said. After her beating, Ponder passed by Hamer and Simpson's cell, and Hamer noticed her mouth was bleeding and her hair was standing up on her head, while her body was badly bruised and her clothing was torn to shreds from the waist down. On the highway patrolman, whom Hamer later identified as John L. Bassinger from his nameplate, entered Hamer's cell. He asked about her origins and current residence. When Hamer told him she lived in Ruleville and that she had been born in Montgomery County, which was Winona's location, Bassinger responded that he needed to verify the information and left the room momentarily. Verifying her information took no effort on Bassinger's part, since his fellow officers had already recognized Hamer by her name. Nonetheless, because it took him so long to return, Hamer was sure that he verified the information by calling Ruleville's mayor, the infamous Charles Durow, who said that quote at the beginning of this chapter, which was, our big job now is to clean up the state's image splattered by the rights workers. We'll now have to teach the younger Negroes the democratic and Christian ways of doing things. Jerk. So, yeah, so she was sure that he verified the information by calling Ruleville's mayor, the infamous Charles Dureau. Once he did this, she was sure to be in trouble because of the local reputation she had developed as a voter registration worker. Her suspicions proved correct. Excuse me. Upon his return, Bassinger announced, "You are from Ruleville. You are from Ruleville, all right. You bitch. We're going to make you wish you was dead." He continued hitting her with a torrent of obscene names that Hamer said she had never heard called a human in my life, all kinds of curse words. Another officer finally ended the barrage of insults by calling her fatso. Bassinger directed the others to take her in here, referring to a cell also known as the bullpen. In that cell stood 2 young black male prisoners. Along with these young men were the jailer and 5 officers, whom the victims later identified as Thomas J. Herrod Jr., the Winona Police Chief William Searle, and Winona Policeman John Bassinger, a state highway patrolman, Earl Patridge, the Montgomery County Sheriff, and Charles Perkins, a former state highway patrolman. Bassinger handed one of the black youths a long, wide blackjack, instructing him, "Take this." Apparently in disbelief, the prisoner asked, "This is what you want me to use?" Bassinger quickly replied, adding a threat, "You damn right, if you don't know what I'll do to you." Hamer noticed that this young man was plagued by a badly swollen hip and thought he had already been beat. The prisoner then directed Hamer to lie down on a nearby cot, to which Hamer responded by unsuccessfully appealing to the young man's race conscience. "You mean you would do this to your own race?" Giving him little time to reconsider on the basis of Hamer's appeal, the patrolman quickly interjected, "You heard what I said." Hamer would live to tell the rest of this experience, and she would tell it over and over until the day she died. In an interview given 3 days after the incident, Hamer recalled that they made her lie on the bed flat on my stomach, and that man beat me. That man beat me until he give out. She began screaming loudly when another officer, plainclothes fella Perkins, he didn't have on nothing like a uniform, walked over and started beating Hamer on the back of her head, alluding to the sexual aspects of the beating as well as to the man's racist thrill for violence. Hamer recalled that Perkins had gotten so hot and worked up off the beating that he could not resist joining in. He began swinging and beating a prostrate, defenseless Hamer. She was terrified. As Perkins and the others battered her head and various parts of her body, Hamer twisted and turned in a futile attempt to protect her polio-weakened left side. "I was trying to guard some of the licks," she remembered. She saw that her bruised and swollen hands were turning blue. Still, a modest and dignified middle-aged woman, Hamer fought to preserve some respectability through the horror and disgrace by holding down her dress. "Quite naturally, being beaten like that, my clothes come up, and I tried to pull them down, you know. It was just pitiful," she reflected. Her brutal assailants allowed her no such momentary release from shame as "one of the other white fellows just taken my clothes and just snatched them up," said Hamer. As Perkins, the other officers, and the male prisoners continued assaulting Hamer, she continued screaming and writhing in pain. "Working my feet because I couldn't help it," she remembered. Perkins ordered one of the Negro prisoners to sit at her feet. The more she screamed, the harder they struck her. Again, she tried whatever she could to bear the torture. "I had to hug around the mattress to keep the sound from coming out." Finally, they stopped and took her back to her cell. During what Hamer would repeatedly refer to as the most horrifying experience I have ever had in my life, everyone else in the jail could hear her screaming for mercy. It would be 9 years before she revealed that one of the state patrolmen pulled my dress over my head and tried to feel under my clothes in the room with all those men. As the 2 black prisoners beat Hamer, the officers continued name-calling and taunting her. They derisively asked if she had seen Martin Luther King Jr. that day. The blows became so hard to bear that Hamer began wishing that the 2 men would strike that one lick that would have ended her misery. After the beating, they attempted to force her back to her cell, but Hamer said she felt drunk and could barely walk. In spite of her woozy condition, the jailer refused to believe that she could not stand up and move her legs under her own power. "Hell, you can walk," he snapped as Hamer kept drifting in and out of consciousness. As Hamer struggled to reach her cell, she collapsed before entering in full view of her co-workers locked up in other cells. The police simply opened up the cell and literally threw her inside, where Johnson said Hamer just lay there crying. All night we could hear her crying. Although this would be the only time that Hamer would be beaten, she would have to continue listening to her co-workers getting beaten the same way that night. Each time she would say to herself, "Oh Lord, somebody else getting it too." Hamer recalled the only kind gesture that she received from the whites throughout her detention. The jailer's wife and daughter gave the prisoners water whenever the jailer and the other men were not around. Hamer also received 2 aspirins for her condition, perhaps from the same 2 sympathetic individuals. Hamer thanked them, remarking, "Y'all is nice. You must be Christian people." The jailer's wife assured Hamer that she had done her best to try to live a Christian life. Hamer then instructed the woman to read 2 Bible verses, Proverbs 26:26 and Acts 7:26. These passages address the question of concealing one's wrongdoing and the divinely sanctioned interaction among all human beings. Perhaps Hamer had hoped the women would pass these verses along to the jailer, since the verses spoke directly to his cruel behavior as opposed to their good deeds. Hamer saw the women jot down the references, but she never saw them again. The brutal beating had a devastating and permanent effect on Hamer's physical health. Some 3 days after the beating, she was still unable to lie on her face while asleep because it felt hard as bone, as did her entire body, especially her fingers, which she could not bend. She was blinded in her left eye, and her kidneys were permanently damaged. The beating also exacerbated the limp that had plagued Hamer as a result of her childhood bout with polio. Hamer knew she could never really forget this experience, if only because the physical reminders were all too prominent. "Every day of my life I pay with the misery of this beating," she once observed ruefully. After her beating, the police considered beating Hamer's cellmate, the teenage Yvester Simpson, but there was concern that her bruises would provide unquestionable evidence since she was lighter in complexion than her co-workers. The police were clearly concerned about being investigated, especially by federal authorities, and they did not want to leave any physical evidence of their wrongdoing. Although unknown to the arrested members at the time, some civil rights workers had come down to the jail that day to inquire about their whereabouts and condition, only to be arrested themselves and subjugated to the same degree of mental and physical torture. Among these was Lawrence Guyot, a 23-year-old Mississippi native and Tougaloo College graduate who had built his own impressive record of activism. As Goya introduced himself to the officers and made it known that he had come to post bond for the group, Sheriff Patrick immediately ordered him to get out of Winona and stay gone. Wow. Just as Goyette was making his way out of the jail, Bassinger knocked him down for the same offense as Ponder, failing to say "sir" to Patridge. Soon the others joined in beating Goyette inside the sheriff's office before locking him up in a cell. Goyette's harrowing experience included being transported to nearby Carroll County, where he was brutally beaten by a group from the Ku Klux Klan. Afterward, he was returned to Winona, where his co-workers were still being detained. This is just too much. During Guyette's detention at the Winona jail, Hamer and others once caught a glimpse of him when Hamer convinced the jailer to leave open a large door because the heat had become unbearable inside what she later described as a dungeon. Hamer was particularly disturbed by Guyette's appearance because he lacked his characteristic beaming grin. According to Hamer, Goyette looked like he was in bad shape, and it was on my nerve too because that was the first time I had seen him not smiling. Later, the group would discover the reasons for Goyette's grim look. He had been forcefully disrobed before being beaten, but there was more. As Hamer put it in a 1968 interview, his sadistic assailants had also taken a piece of paper and tried to burn Goyette's privates off. What in the world is their obsession with our male's genitalia and with this violent assault on the black body? Like, this is really pissing me off because this is not still happening today. In 2020, we're still being lynched. We're still being shot down in the street. We're still having knees on our necks. We're still being shot in handcuffs, shot while we're unarmed. Oh, God. They had taken a piece of paper and tried to burn Goyette's private off. He was detained until sometime after the larger group was released. When he was reunited with his fellow civil rights activists, the big bruises all across his face and body did more to describe his experiences than could mere words. During the time the main door remained open, Hamer also overheard the police and jailers openly discuss the charges they needed to trump up for the group. Excuse me. The expectation of legal retaliation continued to weigh on their minds. In their discussion, it was also quite clear that one or more of them felt that they had gone overboard in the beatings. According to Hamer, I heard discussion. This is what we're going to charge them with. Somebody else said something. He said, well, you're going to have to get up something better than that, man. This is the end of the wire. After Sunday evening, there was apparently no more beatings. On Monday night, the members of the group were notified that their trial was to be held on the following day. On Tuesday, Hamer was personally escorted to court, an empty building, by one of her tormentors who was making a half-hearted attempt to conceal his identity, indicating either his stupidity or his underestimation of Hamer. But Hamer was not in the least bit fooled, for this man had played a role in her beating that was etched in her memory. He was the one who pulled her dress up. According to Hamer, he didn't know I had a sense enough to know him. As with the jailer's wife and daughter, Hamer made an effort to engage him in a discussion about how God would judge his actions the day and night of the beatings. She asked him, do you ever think or wonder how you will feel when the time comes you have to meet God? He played ignorant. Who you talking about? She shot back. People who treated us like we was treated in jail. He denied that he was ever on duty that night. Hamer had another motive as well. She had the presence of mind to retrieve information on this man. Just as she had been trained to do in her voter registration leadership training. She remembered. So I talked so nice, I actually chiseled him out his name, He was unaware of what I was trying to do, and I acted so dumb, I would get their names, and they wouldn't be aware of what was happening. Significantly, Hamer was able to place the Winona events in perspective after a certain point during her detention. She saw the incident as a part of a much larger struggle, an unfolding civil rights battle in which she could fight back later on her own terms and under different circumstances. Thus, she got her attacker to reveal his name with the intention of getting some justice, albeit delayed. But in this regard, she was by no means exceptional, such as the understanding and approach of many activists. The trial itself proved to be sheer farce. Hamer and her friends had no legal representative and were just asked a barrage of questions. Wiley Branton, counsel in the 1957 school desegregation case in Little Rock, Arkansas, and director of the Voter Education Project, was supposed to represent the group, but he had spent most of the day and early evening on Monday trying to secure bail bonds. However, bond never materialized, a fact he did not learn until around 10 o'clock Monday night. By this time, he could not make the necessary travel arrangements to be in court with the group on Tuesday morning. In addition, there was no one who kept an official record of the court proceedings. Although the police tried to divide and conquer by circulating a rumor that some members of the group had pled guilty, all of the members entered not guilty pleas. It was just a matter of minutes before they were all convicted of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, for which each person was fined $65 and $35 for their respective charges. The officials had plans to release the badly beaten 16-year-old June Johnson to her mother, but she insisted that she wanted to wait until the others got out. She was determined to remain true to the vow she had taken with her co-workers. What happened to one would happen to all. Late Tuesday night, the police held the group at gunpoint and forced them all to sign statements saying that they had beat each other and that the officers had done nothing to harm the badly injured prisoners. That is dumb. Meanwhile, the condition of the civil rights workers had quickly become the concern of a number of organizations, including SNCC, SCLC, and the NAACP. They had individual organizational as well as collective movement interests. Those arrested were members of the organizations, and their organizations felt an obligation to come to the aid of their members if they found themselves in danger, especially as a consequence of their civil rights work. But more important, those arrested were black citizens who had been taken into custody because of their race and political beliefs. This meant that Winona warranted a collective response. After Ponder failed to appear for a voter registration workshop in Jackson, Mississippi on Monday, June 10th, SCLC got involved. During a meeting on the proposed March on Washington, Andrew Young was slipped a message some 12 hours after the workers had been taken into custody that Ponder was being detained in Winona and that the situation did not look good. on Tuesday after the trial, and apparently as a result of contact with the Justice Department made by Wiley Branton and Julian Bond, the SNCC Communications Director, the FBI. Wait a minute, let me go back. On Tuesday, after the trial, and apparently as a result of contact with the Justice Department made by Wiley Branton and Julian Bond, the SNCC Communications Director, the FBI came to the Winona jail and began taking pictures and talking to a few people, including Hamer, Guyot, and Ponder. The Justice Department was planning to bring charges against the officers, but Ponder did not believe that the two FBI officials were really there to help. In fact, she noted that they appeared to be cooperating with the chief of police inside the jail. Hamer shared Ponder's skepticism. An FBI agent came to talk with her, but Hamer found it difficult to trust him in light of the agency's previous unwillingness to investigate the Ruleville shootings after her first registration attempt. Wisely, she suspected excuse me. Wisely, she suspected friendly cooperation between the Justice Department and the local officials, and she was cautious about keeping her silence. You see, I didn't know whether if I had said what had happened to me, then he could tell the jailer, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't. When they asked her what she planned to say at the officer's trial, Hamer refused to say. Instead, she repeated her request to get out here now. She could not face another night in the death cell. She reminded herself that God is the only refuge we have, because there wasn't nobody there from the Justice Department. Nobody there to say nothing, just a Negro out by theirself. She wondered, how long will we have to keep shedding blood and getting beat? Hamer and Ponder did not know that Julian Bond had sent a telegraph to Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy at the Justice Department on June 9th, the day the workers were taken into custody. Subsequently, Bond sent letters to officials at the United States Commission on Civil Rights and to the Interstate Commerce Commission asking for an investigation of the arrests. During the group's imprisonment, some of the local officers could barely hide their desire to get the group out of Winona before word reached the Justice Department. They proved unsuccessful at this, and others continued to torture the group. On one occasion, a couple of the women were in the bathroom taking showers when one of the prison trustees attempted to scald them by turning the water on as hot as possible. They immediately jumped out and hollered to their cellmates, "Don't get in." Other abuse came in the form of verbal threats. One policeman threatened, I can guarantee you these damn bars, you won't walk out alive." Hamer also overheard their detainers plotting to kill the group and maybe throw their bodies in the Big Black River, where she knew scores of black bodies had mysteriously surfaced over the years. It looked as if authorities had such a plan in mind when they tried to let the group out, but the civil rights worker refused to leave, believing that law enforcement officials were just trying to establish a pretext for their disappearance and subsequent murder. Hamer believed that the police abandoned these plans thanks in part to the vehement protests of one seemingly sympathetic white male employee in the booking room. At one time, some of them in that booking room, they wanted to kill us, but it was one guy there, and I thank God that he was there. He just rebelled against them killing us. Hamer refused to leave the jail, saying that they would have to kill me in my cell. Throughout their detention, group members did whatever it took to keep themselves calm and sane. Sometimes this involved singing songs whose lyrics spoke to their immediate condition. June Johnson recalled Hamer singing when Paul and Silas were bound in jail. For the most part, it was Hamer who kept the prisoners in good spirits. She drew on her extensive knowledge of the Bible, periodically reciting appropriate verses when it looked as if the group was about to lose faith that it would make it out alive. From time to time, group members tried rebelling in whatever way they could. This involved going on a hunger fast, which ended abruptly when one especially mean black male trustee reported them to jail authorities. After 3 days of detention, Hamer and the others were released from jail thanks to the intensive efforts of many individuals in SNCC, the SELC, including Julian Bond, Dorothy Cotton, Frank Smith Jr., James Bevel, and Andrew Young. Sometime during the group detention, news of the events at Winona also reached Martin Luther King Jr., who worked to determine the group's status and secure its release. After the group's release, Hamer was immediately rushed to a nearby hospital in Greenwood, Mississippi. However, because her injuries were so severe, she was taken to Atlanta for more extensive medical attention paid for by SELC. She eventually spent a few weeks there, convalescing with the assistance of movement friends. From Atlanta, she traveled to Washington, D.C. and New York. During this time, Hamer refused visits from her husband and family because she did not want them to see her her in such bad shape. The only person who did get to see her before she healed completely was her sister Laura, who recalled being unable to recognize Hamer because they had beat her so bad. Lord. And thinking about what her own reaction might have been, she thought, I would have stopped after that beating, but Fannie Lou just kept right on going. I would have been scared they'd have killed me. But Fannie Lou wasn't scared because she just kept right on going. She was not alone in reaching this conclusion. After the Winona events, many others saw in Hamer the distinctive sign of leadership, and among its central traits were courage and persistence. On September 9th, 1963, the Justice Department filed a suit against 5 of the officers, charging them with 7 counts of conspiracy to deprive the Negroes of their civil rights. Earlier, on June 17th, the Justice Department also had filed 2 other suits, one to overturn the convictions of the voter registration workers and the other to prohibit local Mississippi officials from blocking racial integration in bus terminals. Much like the trial of the Winona victims, however, the officers' trial, held in Oxford, Mississippi, site of the Northern District of the United States Court, was a joke. They were tried by an all-white, all-male jury, all of whom were from Mississippi. Repeatedly, Claude F. Clayton, the federal judge hearing the case, made little effort to conceal his bias, referring to Hamer and her co-workers as niggers and agitators, while calling the officers upstanding people and law-abiding citizens. During the trial, all of the victims were called to testify, along with 2 FBI agents, one of whom showed photographs of some of the detainees. One agent even testified that he had seen the blood-stained clothing that young June Johnson managed to sneak out with the help of her mother. There was also testimony from the doctor who examined Hamer and Ponder, and from the 2 black prisoners who were forced to beat the civil rights workers. Both prisoners claimed that they had been paid a pint and a half of corn whiskey for their contribution. Nonetheless, all the officers were acquitted, prompting Hamer to remark, I just wonder how many more times is America going to turn its head and pretend nothing is happening. I used to think the Justice Department was just what it said, justice. I asked one of those men, have y'all got a Justice Department or an Injustice Department? Although Winona represented the most painful tragedy of Hamer's life, it would later serve her well in her efforts to attract attention to the plight of Afro-Mississippians. Nearly all of her many political speeches and public appeals after June 1963 contain a moving, vivid account of that horrifying night. The most notable was her presentation at the 1964 Democratic Party National Convention. In public accounts, Hamer made sure to highlight the politically inspired racial motives behind the attack. But in private, Hamer, the granddaughter of a woman who stressed the special vulnerability of black women, could not help but speculate on the other very sensitive dimensions of the beating. Jacqueline Dowd Hall has described the function of violence in the indiscriminate lynching of black men as ritual sexual violence in service of racial control. To be sure, Hamer readily acknowledged that the incident involved racial control, but in private, Hamer pondered the degree to which her attackers might have experienced some degree of sexual gratification from the beatings. Among the many images that continue to stand out in her mind were the facial expressions of her white attackers, which she believed displays pleasure that was sexual in nature. She attributed this to some form of sexual deviance on the part of her attackers. It is difficult to ignore the many sexual elements of the Winona beating, the repeated raising of Hamer's dress and the patrolman's attempt to feel her body, the forced undressing of young June Johnson, and the egregious example of burning Goyet's penis. One set of questions concerning Winona deals with the meaning these violations held for Hamer's assailants, but there is another that focuses on Hamer herself. Why aren't these incidents central to Hamer's public retellings of Winona? Is it possible that Hamer just forgot these details since her public presentations were almost always delivered extratemporaneously? But these do not seem to be the type of minor, insignificant details that come and go from memory. Perhaps it was a question of political serviceability. Hamer used the sacrifices and risks braved by activists like the Winona victims as examples of the extremes to which certain whites would go to prevent blacks from acquiring a political voice. But would not the sexual dimension be even more useful in this case, perhaps Hammer felt a need to protect the families of the Winona prisoners, her own husband in particular. After all, her personal pain and humiliation were already enough to bear without having to consider that of her husband. Or perhaps Hammer was simply protecting herself against the pain of having to relive that memory and similar ones, the painful memories of a lifetime of sexual vulnerability and humiliation, including her own and that of her mother, her grandmother, and other black women from her childhood. The concern for black women's image, specifically the commonly held negative stereotypes of black women's sexuality, probably had something to do with how Hamer publicly recounted Winona. Like other black women, especially those of her generation, Hamer was inclined to dissemble when it came to sex, race, and violence. Winona seems to be an obvious example of this, if only because Hamer related the incident over and over, using numerous details each time and giving the impression that she told all, but she did not. In any case, it is important to probe behind the fearless public figure to reach her private thoughts and feelings. Upon her return to her native state, Hamer knew that conditions had gone from bad to worse for black Mississippians. The losses of life continued to mount. On the same evening of the Winona beating, Hamer later discovered the NAACP field director, Medgar Evers, had been murdered on his doorstep by a sniper hidden in a nearby clump of bushes. Though this saddened her, it also left her inspired to fight even harder. She returned to her political activities more energized than ever, rising with the sun and going out in the early hours of the morning to canvass among day laborers in the field and making evening rounds to small countryside churches where she sang and preached a message of hope to anyone who would listen about the power of the vote. For months, she tried unsuccessfully to work with the traditional Mississippi Democratic Party by offering to go to work on the precinct level. She had no luck in all. In many cases, Hamer and her co-workers were locked out of precinct meetings, or the meetings were moved to undisclosed locations without prior notification. Whenever she succeeded in getting into a meeting, economic reprisals were sure to follow. For example, when she attended one precinct meeting in Ruleville, her husband, recently hired on a new job, was fired the following day. Soon, Hamer and SNCC activists concluded that the only way to attack the tight Mississippi political machine was to establish a political party of their own. They did, and they named it the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, MFDP. All right, well, that's chapter 3. Wow. That's all I can say. Thank you all for tuning in. Be back with chapter 4 soon.